All day, our vintage mobile cinema has been screening rarely seen footage of the First World War. Our specially invited audience have been sharing their family stories of the Great War.
It just seems completely unjust.
Vandra Isherwood's grandfather, William Lowther, signed up for the Accrington Pals Brigade along with his two brothers. Vandra's grandmother voiced reservations about the mass sign-up.
She thought how silly grandfather was to enlist. He was a collier and he wasn't a very young man. I think he was 33 when he died. But she thought how foolish to enlist when you had a wife and a young family. But I since believe that they could have been ostracised if they didn't join, or they were very short of employment and it was attractive. There would be regular money coming in and meals.
All three brothers lost their lives. Vandra's about to see harrowing footage of the Somme and explain to us the tragic events her grandfather endured on the opening day of battle.
He had a brother who joined earlier and he was killed the year before in Gallipoli. And then on the 1st of July, when my grandfather was killed, he had another brother who killed the same day, and apparently not very far away from where my grandfather was on the Somme.
The loss for women back home was immeasurable. The death of Vandra's grandfather left her grandmother widowed and her mother fatherless. They moved to Manchester to try and start a new life alone.
With the dreadful trauma they'd gone through, they then had to rebuild their lives, which wasn't made easy for them. So it is a real tribute that they managed to build new lives for themselves and their families, but it was at a great price, really. It must have been tremendously difficult and hard work for them that hadn't been on the cards when they were first young married women.
Hundreds of men from towns across East Lancashire joined the Accrington Pals. Their stories are now mainly retold by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But here with us today is Veronica Abbott, with a story about her father, Thomas Leach, one of a group who joined from Chorley in Lancashire. Veronica's never seen film of the Accrington Pals before. This newsreel from 1915 shows the battalion leaving their training site on Salisbury Plain to see active service.
My father was at a seminary at Ashall, which is over in Yorkshire. He was training to be a priest. I presume he came home for the summer holidays at the time when all the furore was being whipped up, you know, sort of your country needs you, and obviously volunteered.
Ironically, once Veronica's father was in the army, he was trained as a marksman.
To actually be a marksman and have to kill to a man who was going to be a priest must have actually been incredibly difficult for him.
The shock of what Veronica's father witnessed saw his life after the war take a completely different path to the one he'd planned before he volunteered.
He never went back to the seminary. I presume that what he experienced had been too great for him to really cope with.
Like so many of his generation, Veronica's father wouldn't, or couldn't, talk about his time in the army.
My mother would say he would go very quiet and possibly go and sit in another room. He did a beautiful tapestry of a crinoline lady, which wasn't a thing that a Victorian man would normally have done, you know, sort of all the intricate stitching. Again, I think it was presumably to take his mind off, I don't know. I didn't know him in his heyday. I'm the youngster of a very large family. By the time I was really taking notice. He was already crippled with rheumatoid arthritis. To me, he was a lovely father. You know, you can't really say anything more than that.
Today we're at the Queen's Lancashire Regiment Museum and Barracks in Preston, hearing First World War stories. With some dramatic archive footage from the front line, we can bear witness to the horrific conditions in the trenches endured by the battalions of soldiers, often friends, sometimes brothers. Richard Bell's grandfather, William, joined up along with his brother, Donald. William survived, but his brother didn't. Donald Bell received the highest award for valour during the Battle of the Somme in 1916.
Well, these are replicas of the Victoria Cross and other medals awarded to my great-uncle, Second Lieutenant Donald Simpson Bell. He was awarded this for an action that took place on the 5th of July during the Battle of the Somme. He, together with two other soldiers, dashed across no man's land and put the machine gun post out of action, thus enabling the rest of his regiment to proceed. Unfortunately, 5 days later, on the 10th of July, in an attack on Contal-Maison, he sadly lost his life.
Richard's come along to watch our rare footage of the First World War. Making these films near the front lines were a small number of news correspondents working under the authority of the War Office. It was dangerous work. What memories will these films evoke of Richard's grandfather and his great-uncle, who were both willing volunteers?
In 1914, of course, they had no idea of what they were going to face. I suppose they all thought they were going to march off and it'd all be over in a few months and they'd come home and that'd be it. And of course it wasn't.
Donald was one of the thousands of British casualties at the Somme. His brother William, Richard's grandfather, was also serving in France and made an entry in his diary when he learned of his brother's death.
There's an entry on the 19th of July. A telegram about Don's death. Stay on lorry all day, too upset to work. And so that's how he first got to know that his younger brother had been killed. It always brings a lump to my throat. I feel like they're talking to me. And my grandfather never spoke of any of this when I was a small boy. And I think that's quite common, that these veterans didn't want to, very rarely spoke about what they had been through and what they'd suffered and what they'd seen. And they just wanted to sort of keep it inside and I suppose to try and forget all about it, because it must have been horrifying to live through. So having these now, it's a very real connection back to those times, and something means a lot to me.
It's unbearably sad to think of all these young men, friends, brothers and colleagues, who lost their lives. I've travelled to the Accrington War Memorial in Oak Hill Park, Lancashire. First World War memorials like these were the first time in our history that ordinary men were remembered by name. They're listed in alphabetical order, regardless of rank. Les Bond, who I met earlier, wrote a poem about one of the pals with his late brother. It seems a fitting way to commemorate the sacrifice that these ordinary men made for us.
In an Accrington pub hangs a picture, in a frame on a wall or a bar. It's got one man's name, Tommy Atkins, and a date, July 1st in Great War. Tommy thought hard as he traipsed home up lane. How were he going to tell wife? He'd made a decision to go and enlist. Aye, even to lay down his life. That looks greatly tough in the uniform, Tom. Have one with me from top shelf. Eli, give Tommy a tot and a handshake. Good luck, Tom. God bless. Good health. Sarah Jane was cream sewn in her doorstep. Her Tommy was soon home on leave. He'd penned a few words for somewhere in France. See thee soon, bonny lass. Don't to grieve. She looked at yon telegram and grabbed hold at kids. Tears down her cheeks getting wetter. He'd set off o'er Wickfroat station and come back in a government letter. In a Lancashire pub hangs a memory, in a frame on a wall or a bar, donated with Tommy's young widow, and a date, July 1st, in Great War.
The idea of appealing to a group of young men, a group of pals, to go off together, to fight as volunteers in the war, was thought to be a great idea at the time. And when they were mown down and whole communities were wiped out, the army was quick to withdraw it, because it had worked in one way and then it was devastating in another. But I think why it remains almost more poignant than all the other terrible things that happened was because it was about something deeper than anything else. It was about friendship.